Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much again for joining us on the second day of SportGen. Amazing to have you all. I'm honored today to be joined by Sanjog Gupta, CEO of the International Cricket Council. To give you a little bit of context on cricket, it is the world's second most popular sport. In the last few years, it has begun a journey from being a sport that is endemic to certain parts of the world, and it is evolving now to become a sport that is truly, truly global. And that is a key part of Sanjog's mandate as well as the CEO of the ICC. So I guess the first question that's good to begin with is, what does it mean for you for cricket to be a global sport? What exactly are the things that you keep in mind when you think of that goal?
It's an interesting question. Obviously, the sport is already global, and there was an interesting moment we had a couple of months back when the final of our World Cup in India and Sri Lanka became the most streamed global event ever, right? So, and in fact, if you look at that list, if you look at the top 5 most watched digital events ever, there's only one event up there which is not a cricketing event, and 4 of them happen to be events or games from our World Cup. So yes, you have two men of Indian origin sitting and discussing cricket here. Obviously, India happens to be its biggest market, but it's already as Anu said, the second biggest sport in terms of popularity with almost 2 billion fans. It is, in terms of viewership and global viewing figures, each of our events crosses 1 billion viewers with only about 60% coming from India, which means that there is a sizable audience running into hundreds of millions watching all over the world. Yes, it tends to be a combination of the South Asian diaspora, but it also includes countries like Japan, Indonesia, Italy, which incidentally played its first ever Cricket World Cup a couple of months back and won a game. The US, women's cricket in Brazil, which has really taken off. So what we are seeing for cricket, or are already seeing the green shoots for the sport, is a moment of transformation that can potentially be engineered from the endowments that it already has, right? It does have a product which is steeped in legacy and heritage, but it also has a product which is meant for a generation that potentially has the attention investment of which is much lower than previous generations before it, and wants to be entertained. So the fact that the sport has a product portfolio which appeals equally to core fans who are of a certain demographic and in certain countries, but also has a new product which is only about a decade and a half old, now finding markets which the traditional format didn't have, is an endowment that cricket can build around and has the foundation to leap from.
And when we talk, I mean, you mentioned the T20 World Cup, and you mentioned that some of the biggest growth has come from non-core markets like Korea, Japan, Germany, Italy. What is the strategy for you when it comes to increasing the depth of reach in these markets? How do you approach the places that are already perhaps not too familiar with the sport, but are places that you'd like to expand into?
I mean, the ideal answer to that is if there was a way for us to identify each fan and market the sport to them, that's what we would want to do. But given the constraints that we have with what's possible, I think each market requires a strategy of its own. Some markets will be built bottom up, where participation and the entry into the sport will happen on the back of community and will happen on the back of a desire to play sport. And in some markets, it'll be top down, where the desire to watch the sport will actually drive affiliation for it. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. What we are in the process of is building out a comprehensive strategy for what we call Horizon 2 markets. But what that strategy will do is effectively help us develop the foundational layer to build a strategy for each market that we believe has potential for growth, both in terms of how we look to deepen existing fandom, but also how do we recruit new audiences.
And I think a lot of people perceive, you mentioned the fact that, of course, a lot of the numbers behind cricket, they do come from the subcontinent, they do come from a specific part of the world, and a lot of people perceive that to be some sort of a hindrance for the game as well, because it is, extremely concentrated. But one can make the argument that it's no different in the American sports that have internationalized very, very efficiently, despite having literally one very core market. What is your take on that? Do you see it in a similar manner? Or do you think that the sort of concentration is indeed a challenge for the sport?
Why would the popularity of a sport in a country which is deemed to be one of the 5 largest economies in the world, and also the fastest growing large economy in the world, be seen as a disadvantage? It's a massive advantage. The fact that cricket's popular in a part of the world which is much younger than the rest of the world automatically is an endowment as well, because it potentially means that its future, as far as the sustenance of the sport is concerned, is much more secure than some of the other sports which have demographic challenges. So both in terms of the regional presence of the sport and the regions that it's present in, also the diversity of the regions that it's present in. On one side, you have the UK, which continues to have deep affiliation for the heritage that the sport offers, but also has seen growth on the back of a new product in the form of T20 being offered to them. And on the other, you have new markets emerging largely on the back of T20 with very little affiliation for heritage. So again, I think when we look at our, we have about 120 members, so there are 120 countries playing cricket at one level or the other. When we look at our members, and even if we look at our top 30 members in terms of their performance, the representation from all 5 major regions is actually more diverse than most sports currently have. We have US, Canada, the Caribbean islands, and now Brazil in women's cricket playing elite level cricket. We have Africa being activated across South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Rwanda, Uganda. We have countries in continental Europe. We have the UK. We obviously have South Asia. And then you have Oceania and the Far East. So just in terms of the expanse of the sport, I don't think any sport other than football can potentially claim to have the same scale of expanse that cricket has.
And another thing that's very interesting, and you've spent a very illustrious career in broadcast media and so on, and what we've seen for the recent World Cup, regions that did not have existing broadcast deals, they could watch every game on a D2C platform called ICC TV. And for a sport like this, which is trying to expand outward, I guess access to content is a huge part of it. Can you speak to perhaps the role that's playing in your mandate and your general thoughts on perhaps being, access first for something like this, as opposed to relying on traditional means of broadcast?
I mean, look, I think every sport faces this today. We have to be where the fans are. I think gone are the days when we could choose to be on a platform and believe that the sport will grow on the back of all our potential fans reaching that platform. So I think as you look to service the core, you also have to constantly be in the mode of recruiting new audiences. And those audiences may or may not come on the back of sport itself. They may come on the back of the experience that the sport offers. They may come on the back of the lifestyle that's associated with the sport. They may come on the back of their favorite content creator or influencer being a fan of the sport, because you're also now increasingly seeing fans watch any content through the eyes of others. So I think the fundamentals of what constitutes fandom, but what constitutes the levers which activate fandom have changed forever. And I don't think they're ever changing back. So it's a challenge that sport in general has. It's a challenge that a large sport and a popular sport with the expanse that we have has even more. Because we don't believe that we will be able to attract a fan in Tokyo with the same strategy that we will be able to attract a fan or deepen a fan's affiliation for the sport in India or the UK. So one, like I said at the start, if there was a way for us to genuinely address the market of one, that's utopia. But in the absence of that, for us to be able to profile our fans and either segment them by the geography that we could potentially find them in, the demographic segment they belong to, at times they're psychographic profiles. Like I said, there are different reasons to consume or consideration for consumption that potential fans have, and we now have to increasingly be where they are and serve them the sport in the manner that will attract them, instead of believing that our sport in the way that we want to present it is necessarily going to propel growth of the sport among new audiences.
And another very important part of your mandate has been the development of the women's game as well. And what we've seen is we have the ICC T20 Women's World Cup coming up next month, which is built to be one of the biggest events in women's sports globally, not just in terms of cricket. And I think one thing that cricket has done well, whether it's with club competitions or with national competitions, is that it has created a meaningful product that is not directly always linked to the men's game. Because a problem that we often find in football is people making either copy-pasting the business model or comparing the two sports as if they are competing against each other. So how do you approach the strategy for the women's game? How does it differ, perhaps, with the men's game? Is there a difference in that strategy?
It's a completely independent strategy. Yes, it borrows from the endowments that the sport has. So just to share some insights around fandom for the sport, the initial adopters for women's cricket happened to be the core fans that men's cricket had. Right? So that's an endowment that we have, that we do have core fans in the hundreds of millions who want to watch high-quality cricket. And for them, the consideration for women's cricket or the barriers to consumption weren't linked to anything other than the belief that the standard of the sport was good enough. Right? And once that barrier got broken, core viewers of men's cricket or core fans of men's cricket also converted to being fans of women's cricket. I think that the next phase of this journey is to really grow women's cricket from where it is today. And we genuinely believe that women's cricket has the potential to be the #1 women's sport in the world. Again, and if you look at the World Cup last year, we had, I think it was 3.5x the level of digital engagement on the Women's World Cup for cricket than the Women's World Cup for football or rugby had. So that's how far ahead we are. Yes, it's propelled by a strong Asian audience and audiences, again, as I said, in UK and Australia, which happen to be core markets for the sport. But what we are seeing with women's sport, interestingly, is a very interesting socio-cultural phenomenon where women's cricket in countries where men's cricket isn't deeply entrenched is actually leapfrogging men's cricket. And a classic example of this are two countries, China and Brazil, where you don't really see men's cricket because in one country, basketball dominates as the men's sport, and in the other, it's football. But what it's doing, because the sport is seen to be so strongly associated with men, is that it's giving women a reason to consider cricket, which is not necessarily linked to sport, but linked to aspects of belonging and community. That this is their way of coming together and playing a sport which brings them together on a platform which is considered to be equal to the platform that men have of football. And I think women's cricket has very different endowments compared to men's cricket. It genuinely has the potential, as we've seen in India and in some other countries around the world, the potential to unlock societal value for women and for men and for families, actually. The kind of audience that we see for women's cricket at times is very different from the kind of audience that we see for men's cricket, especially in countries like UK and Australia, where it's young girls, young families turning up to watch women's cricket because they feel, it's more accessible, and two, it truly represents, in a sense, who they are, much more than men's cricket does. So I do think that there is a need for it to have an independent strategy and almost be built as an independent ecosystem while borrowing the endowments that men's cricket has. And it will be driven by considerations which are unique to women's cricket as a sport, and not necessarily the same as what are for men's cricket as a sport.
And I think with the 2028 Olympics coming up, cricket is going to be perhaps more represented than ever on the world stage. It's going to be part of the Summer Olympics for the first time, which is huge for visibility, huge for the sport. But how do you plan to take the windfall from that and make sure that it carries on into the future, whether in new markets, whether in existing markets? Where do the Olympics sort of figure in the strategy to internationalize and grow further for the sport?
Look, I think it's not just the games, but what the inclusion in the games unlocks for the ecosystem, right? One, it means cricket now features as part of many national governments' sports charter because it's a part of the Olympics. What that means is that there is recognition for the sport in the institutional framework that countries or nations have. I think the second thing that it does is it truly puts cricket as part of a global showcase of sport in general, where in that moment during LA 28, it's being seen in countries which are watching the Olympics and are watching sports being played at what is seen to be the biggest spectacle of multi-sports. I think the third vector has to do with the ecosystem around the Olympics, which are all the multi-sport games, the regional multi-sport games, which when having the impact that they can alongside the Olympic movement also mean that there is more institutional support, there's also wider visibility, and there's greater exposure for the fact that those nations actually play the sport. I mean, I was at the Southeast Asian Games recently, and Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia were in action. And what participation in those games does for them is that it gives another reason for the local sport-loving population to consider cricket as part of the mix. So I think it's definitely a presence at the games which provides cricket that global stage for showcasing itself. But it's also the ecosystem and the Olympic movement and being a part of it that potentially unlocks for the sport an entire institutional framework which potentially was not available earlier.
Well, Sanjog, I believe we're nearly out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we've won a few new fans in the audience as well, and I know for a fact there are a lot of existing fans as well. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming to Paris, and thank you for listening to the session, everybody. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.